establishes two tiers of tax rates for properties classified as residential. Residential Tier 2 property tax rates would apply to properties in residential class with an assessed value of $2 million or more that are not receiving a home exemption, or properties in residential class that are vacant land with an assessed value of $2 million or more. This is introduced by Miss David and Mr. Chung.
There's been a lot of discussion about this thing, not just lately, but over the years. I just wanted to give you guys my thinking, and I think it's probably shared by Miley, but there's there's a very subtle but significant difference between our position or my position and the administration's. Okay, what I had intended to do, I'd always been toying with this, and we're waiting for a little bit more direction from a situation with the city and county. But I wasn't intending to have this thing surface this fiscal year. Okay, it was actually for next year where we could, have a little bit more thorough vetting when, COVID had cleared itself and we could have a lot of participation. But as it turns out, COVID has hastened the necessity for something like this. Now, we have the CARES Act that's going through the legislature, and it's very possible that we may be able to balance our budget this year. But things are so fluid that it's very difficult to tell at this point. I think this is a handy tool. I kind of jerked when I saw, a $3.50 increase in this second tier that was, advanced by the administration. I even if this measure passes today, I cannot guarantee that they'll have my support on a $3.50 rate increase for that second tier. And again, it's kind of, I guess, coincidental that Hope Services, whom I had never spoken to on this matter before, should come, because it had always been my idea that whatever revenues were generated via this increase could be, in part or in total, be used for affordable housing and homelessness. And it was my further hope that those persons who were affected could see clearly what their monies were being used for, even if, I certainly can understand their angst, but at least if they could see that it was specifically earmarked for a very, very important social purpose, that they'd be at least a little bit more amenable or accepting of the proposal. But, things have changed. And now we're looking at having to try to balance our budget. And so I certainly, again, understand how people might be feeling that now, we're balancing the budget on their backs. And that's a bitter pill to swallow. I certainly understand that as well. But, when I looked over the people who testified today, a lot of them were in the real estate business. Okay. And then, so they have vested interests, and, their points of view, of course, are very, very important. They make good points. The people who are being affected by this are not using up our resources here, whether it be healthcare or others. They're only here for about a month, and at the same time, they're paying a huge amount of taxes. And they're also employing our workforce. So there's a lot of benefits. But at the same time, on the other side, I think to myself, $2 million second home, Our local community, we don't even have a $2 million first home. You're $500,000 first home, but $2 million second home. And that addresses some of the concerns that were brought up by some other folks. They were saying, well, what's to prevent the council from moving the threshold from 2 million down to 1 million? I think that's highly unlikely, and that's not the proposal before us anyway. More than likely, that 2 million is going to go up higher over the years, I think, as valuations get higher. And then there was another fellow or two people, the Leishers, who were worried about how this might affect their property down in Keoho Bay. But I believe that it won't affect them, and I wanted to assure them because they are property, they're homeowners. And there was even some talk that it might have been on ag land too, and that's not going to be covered by this. This is specifically only for residential properties that are not part of a homeowner exemption. So the person who's living there, if they're living there, it's not going to be affected by this two-tiered rate. I am concerned, though, about this thing with, I don't even know how you pronounce their last names. I think it was David and Tim Hofson or something like that, who've had their properties, for a long time, and especially it's through the foresight of their parent or grandparent. It's possible that we could think of some ways of carving out exceptions for persons, in those types of situations, and that can be done later. I am concerned about that. But, I think this is a tool that we should try to advance. If we don't apply it this year, well, so be it. But at least, we're looking at a really bad situation next fiscal year. I think people don't realize it. It's worse. It's going to be worse next fiscal year than this fiscal year. So maybe if we can just hold this, if we don't use it this year, can use it next time. If we have to use it this year, well, then so be it. But that's just my thoughts, and I just wanted to give you a little share the difference between my view of this and how the administration was going at it. They're there to balance the budget, and unfortunately, that's the reality of the situation. I was looking at it a little differently, and it wasn't going to be used this year, but here we are. So that's that. Miley, you want to say anything?
The fact that I agreed to co-introduce this was because I really believed that this bill establishes or creates the process to implement or to put within our code a tier tax section or a tier tax rate. So we're creating the process, and I want to dispel some of the concerns that people were assuming that if we pass this bill, we've already raised the tax. But this is to create the process, and like you said, in order to affect a tax increase, whether it's the increase being proposed by the administration at this time, there is a separate process for that, and that will involve coming forward with a resolution, and then also the public hearings to inform the public and get public input. So for the reasons you stated, and I think there is a fair process in order to really look into this matter and have it available in case we do need it. I also feel that if this goes through and we get that fourth federal funding that Ms. Deanna Sacco is thinking about, then it's probably not going to happen. So I really think that we need to have this within our procedures, as does the city and county of Honolulu and also Maui County, because I think they did it way before we did, and it's a useful tool. And like you said, it's not set in stone, and it can change as we move forward. So I'd like to hear from the rest of my council members at this point, and so I'll yield. Thank you, Chair.
I appreciate it coming forward, and it seems like every year we're trying to do business and we get faced with another challenge coming forward. On principle, I don't support this, and I'll tell you why. We're in a financial problem, and we've heard constituents testifying, and I agree, that we should be more interested in cutting a budget rather than trying to figure out how to fund the budget as before us. And I was puzzled, but what Chair Chung made the comment, and I agree with him, that if we were to come up with a program that was being funded by this two-tier situation, I might be interested in that. But I think the timing of this is wrong. And Chair, if it's all right, I'd like to, I see Lisa is in the audience. I'd like to ask a few questions about real property tax, if I could call her up, please.
Lisa Mira, Real Property Tax Administrator.
Okay, Lisa, thanks for coming up. And can you just give us a brief summary? Most everybody in chambers knows it, but for the listening public, real property tax collections are what percentage of our total budget, and where does most of that come from? And then how will this proposed tax, if it were to go through, and again, we're just putting the framework in there. We're not talking the tax, but if this were to go through based upon what was presented to us, where would that funding come from?
So I just want to clarify the question. You want to know, for all the tax collections that real property tax does, where does most of that funding go?
No, where does it come from?
You mean on the island?
Correct.
Okay, so
Geographically.
typically in the past, 70% has been between council districts 9, 8, and 7. It's hard because council district 6 covers a really large area now. So it's hard for us to say West Hawaii just versus East, because Councilmember David's district goes a little bit further. But that's typically how it's been set, 70-30. Some people take her district into account, then you'd be closer to 75-25.
Okay. And if a tax like this were to be adopted, where would that funding come from? Again, you can do percentage-wise.
So yeah, I just want to clarify, you're asking the 2 million, the properties of residential tax class that are over 2 million and over that is being written into this bill, which districts are those predominantly coming from?
Correct. That would be affected by this tax.
Okay, so the predominant district is going to be Karen Eoff's district, which is District 8. The second would be District 9. The third is District 7, which would be Councilmember Villagas. And the rest of the island makes up the other percentage.
Okay, and so can you assign percentages to those? Do we have those?
Yeah, we have rough percentages. And I just want to clarify with everybody, you know, we're still double checking every single property in this tax class. And we're making sure that everything applies to this bill. There's a few words in here that makes it very specific. And so I know there's a lot of confusion that I heard from testifiers today. Somebody felt their property in Kealakekua Bay fit into it. There's not one property in Kealakekua Bay that we came across that was going to fit into here. So there is a lot of confusion. So I want to start with that. Approximately 55% is in Karen Eoff's district, which doesn't surprise too many people because that is going to be your Kukio, your Hualalai, and your Kohanaiki shores. Approximately 40% is in your district because that's going to include everything north of there. And the rest is about 4% in Ms. Villagas's district, and the rest, the 1% to the rest of the island.
I don't have any more questions for you right now, but going forward, again, we're talking about a budget that we need to balance. And I've always said, even when I was first elected, that the way to fund our government is not to increase taxes, it's to expand our economy and let the tax base go up with that expanding economy. And we're seeing a situation now in nobody's lifetime, and I'm not sure, depending how you compare it to the Great Depression back in the 20s, if this is going to be worse. I don't know how to measure that. I do know that California was getting nervous when their unemployment rate was approaching 20%, and our state's at 37, 38. Our county, we don't have very good numbers with that, but I have to imagine we're at least 40, if not higher. And I can't see where increasing taxes at this point is going to be helpful to our economy as a whole, because we have to rebuild our economy. Last year, we were told by administration that we lost $1 billion out of our economy, out of $8.5 billion economy. So we lost a huge amount. That was because of the volcano and Hurricane Lane. We lost a huge amount, and now we're still knocked back on our heels, and we're facing this coming forward. And one of the things that Mr. Ushiroda made a comment about having funding coming forward and funding municipal golf course on West Side. I thought that was a very interesting idea, especially when we talked about use of the wastewater and all. And in a different time, in a going economy time, I think that there's some merit to having a two-tier, or potentially a two-tier, when the economy is driving, so we can look at that funding, which is kind of what Chair Chung has made the comment on, identifying a program or programs for specific use of funds, and I like that. I think we need to establish a affordable housing fund, revolving fund, whatever, but we don't have the funds to do that this year. I think we need to work harder on our budget and do some budget cuts, and we didn't do my continually requested ad hoc committees to work on the budget cuts this year because, again, things are all over the place. I think, actually, quite frankly, we need to work harder on the cost control. When I took office back in 16, our budget was $462 million or somewhere in that ballpark, and proposed for next year was 626. We're back at 585, but that's only 7% less than what we were initially proposed. So at 585 million, and listening to other jurisdictions on these national calls, they're talking 15 to 20% reduction, and I think next year is going to be really hard. So on principle, I can't support this going forward at this time. A different time, I like the idea, and I like some of the proposals people have put forth. But I think we have to work harder on the economy and work harder on our budget, and it's going to be tough. I think we need to look at, if we can, look at cuts for our payrolls. I think we need to look very hard because it's going to be a rough year, and I'm very mindful of that going forward. So again, I am for starting the economy, but I don't think taxing is the way to start the economy. I don't think that's the way to go. Chair, I'll yield.
My previous employment took me to many parts of the island, and in some of those instances, I visited homes on the west side, in the districts you just mentioned, and I put solar systems that could fire up a building of this size on some of them. And when I was there, the homeowners were not present, and the ACs were running, the pools were running, the maids were cleaning the house. There's some job, creation there. But what I saw was a lot of utility use for a homeowner that is there, I'd say less than 3 months out of the year. I think that might be overestimating their time here. I appreciate them in our community. I know they do a lot for our community, as was said in some of the testimony. But I also know the drain of those properties on our utilities here is large. And we all, the rest of us, pay for the usage as a whole. So I would agree with this bill. Timing wise, it seems like nothing that we do now, timing wise, seems to be good, whether it be a bill, a resolution, or a CRF. Nothing seems to be good timing. Doesn't matter how we put it forward. But here we are. But I think, unfortunately, for the 0.6 of the population who has a property that will classify in this, according to this bill that's being proposed, the other 99.4% will benefit, and even the 0.6% will benefit too from the income we can take in from this property tax increase. So it's never, it's never going to be seen as fair if we're going to raise property taxes on the rich, as it was being said. But at the same time, we have a cost as a county, and this is one of the major ways we pay for everything in this county. So I appreciate it being brought forward. I'm sure this wasn't an easy bill to write or put forward. And on behalf of Miley and Aaron, Tim, I can see your points. And I'm from Puna. I'm guessing there's not a lot of $2 million plus properties in my district. So I'm sure my district isn't going to come screaming down, on me for this one. But for Kona side, for Karen and Tim and Miley and Rebecca, this will be interesting. I'd like to hear Kona's comments before we move forward. But at this point, I can see the merit of this bill.
For me, I've talked with the principals at Kawaniki Shores. I've had long discussion with Lisa and Deanna. I'm trying to put some real figures together in my mind so I can see just what kind of impact this has. Lisa was nice enough to kind of help me through that because it's really not that complicated. But one of the things I learned in that exercise was that if this bill were to be put in place, and of course, it doesn't do anything to the rates at this point. It's just the structure set up. We would still have to actually propose a rate hike for that second tier. And my understanding now is that if we keep it at the 2 million, that means the assessed value up to the 2 million would remain at the same rate as any other residential rate in tier 1, but the value after the 2 million on up would then be assessed at a higher rate, whatever rate we set. So that was kind of comforting to some of the concerns at Kawaniki Shores. They do have a lot of properties that are just maybe a little bit over $2 million. So that wouldn't really change too much in those cases. It's going to be the properties upwards of, say, $5 million that are going to have a larger contribution, a significant increase. I think what the numbers is something like, if you're paying at the rate we have now on a $5 million home, you're going to be paying about $55,000 a year, and you'd pay probably an additional little bit over $10,000 more per year if we raised it to the 14% that the mayor was proposing. Now, hopefully, and this is also kind of consoling, is that we may be able to use CARES Act funds to patch this hole in our budget this year. And if that's the case, we won't need to increase the rates on this second tier residential class. So I'm really hoping that happens. Of course, that would be just fantastic.
And finally, I just want to touch on one thing, and it was kind of brought up by Ms. Villegas, and I'm going to put it in a different way. Of course, we all admire. I admire anyone who can make a success of themselves and get a 2 million plus home, second home. Good for them. But I think what many of these individuals should try to understand anyway is that it has taken an emotional toll on our local population. For those of us who have lived here for all of our lives, or for many years, we're I didn't really want to it to come down to this, but a lot of times we're put in the position of looking from the outside in, with many of these beautiful properties, and so there is an emotional price, and hopefully people can understand that too. Anyway, we have a motion on the floor. Let's do it by a roll call vote.
On the motion to pass Bill 169 as amended on first reading, Ms. David,
Aye.
Ms. Eoff,
Aye.
Mr. Connie Lee Kleinfelder,
Aye.
Ms. Kirkowitz,
Aye.
Ms. Leloy,
Aye.
Ms. Poindexter,
Aye.
Mr. Richards,
No.
Ms. Villegas,
Aye.
Chair.
Aye.
Chair of 8 votes in favor.